And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. I'm Peter Alexievich, and for me, it is just past midnight on Wednesday, October 2nd. That makes this the news for Tuesday, October 1st, 2024, day 952 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. Again, I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv, bringing you all the latest and most important happenings from on the ground here in Ukraine. We are live both on YouTube and on the Tickety Talk, following a week's live ban from TikTok. And I can see the peeps are coming in. On YouTube and on. I see Chef Deb, Mad Mike, Sarah Bradshaw over on the YouTube. And on the Tickety Talk, a lot of the folks are coming in. There's Fitz, Cheyenne, Nicola. Hi guys, how you doing? So we are back live on TikTok, but I do want to say, hey Dan Hendricks, hey Darlene, I do want to say for everybody on TikTok, please be aware that I'm live on YouTube, and the environment there is somewhat more graphically rich. It's really a different world. The live ban on TikTok last week forced me over to YouTube, and I got to tell you, I'm loving it. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. I want to start by thanking the sponsors of these lives this week, the board of directors, Ballerina, Bobby, Dark Irish, Jason Willis Starn, and Lars from Encino Tech. You guys are the best. I literally could not do this without you. And then we'll go to the last night's missile and drone attacks. Now, guys, I was not live last night. I wasn't live because Sunday night here in Kyiv, it was very loud. I didn't get much sleep. I had a long day yesterday, and by the time midnight came around for the live, I just could not do it. And this morning, we had yet another air raid alert. 29 out of 32 drones were shot down, and another 3 were taken out with electronic warfare. Now that means that that's 100% interception rate. 100% interception rate. And we've seen a lot of that over the month of September. September was the only month in the history of this war that the Russians attacked every single day with scaled missile and drone attacks, virtually every single day with scaled attacks, meaning more than 30 drones and some missiles at a time. There were a couple days, let's see, 1, 2, 3. 3 days in the month of September that we saw 6 or fewer drones come in, meaning that those were reconnaissance days, right? The drones were looking for targets. They were looking for pathways to avoid air defense. September was a tough month. Everybody here is exhausted. And this is why. The constant grind of daily missile and drone attacks over the course of the last month, not to mention the pressure on the front line, which has everybody's friends and relatives at risk, has been difficult for everyone. There's no two ways about it. Despite that pressure, today marked the Day of the Defender of Ukraine. And on this day, the country recognizes the armed forces and the contributions that the armed forces make to this nation. It commemorates not only the fallen heroes, those that have given everything in the cause of democracy and freedom here in Ukraine, but those who have served in the past, the veterans of the war, and those who are today on the front line guarding us in our sleep. All over Ukraine today at 9 a.m. this morning, everybody stopped what they were doing. Traffic stopped what it was doing. Traffic stopped in the streets. Pedestrians stopped in the streets. Boisterous classrooms full of shouting children stopped. And a moment of silence was observed across Ukraine for those fallen defenders, as well as those that are still fighting today, preserving this nation. Olaf Scholz. So moving to international news. Olaf Scholz intends to call Putin in the next couple of weeks. Now, this will be the first direct communication between a Western leader and the dictator in the Kremlin since 2022, since before the full-scale invasion happened. And one has to ask the question, why? Why is he reaching out to Putin at this time? And I think that the answer may lie in the comments that we saw from Biden and Harris this past week on the heels of Zelensky's visit. Both the president and the vice president and presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, used language that heretofore we have not heard. President Biden said the words, "We will supply Ukraine with everything it needs to win." That's the first time we have heard him say that he wants Ukraine to win. For her part, presidential candidate Vice President Harris said that she will work to ensure Ukraine prevails in this war. Again, a clear statement that the U.S. wants Ukraine to win, something we have not heard from this administration prior to this. This comes on the heels of Biden's call for a presidential-level Ramstein group meeting October 15th. Now, what does that mean? It means that the 57 countries that participate in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that meets in Ramstein, Germany, will meet October 15th with the heads of state. Now, we don't know exactly how many of the 57 heads of state will be able to make it, but we do know that it will be a head of state meeting. So premier, president, or prime minister level will be represented at this next October 15th meeting. Now, why would that be? Right? Why would Biden call this meeting? What does he hope to achieve? I mean, the reality is that we don't know, but we can speculate, right? Or we can think about what we want Biden to get out of this. Is he there trying to secure his legacy? Will the Ramstein Contact Group speak with one voice? Is Scholz trying to get in touch with Putin over the next few weeks so that he will listen to what the Ramstein Group says? And will we finally see the cuffs taken off the Ukrainians and the approval of long-range strikes into Russia using American equipment? Now, I'll come back to that in 1 second. I just want to point out that we also had this happen today. Jens Stoltenberg handed over the reins of NATO as Secretary General to his replacement and successor, Mark Rutte. Now, for his part, Rutte said he started out by talking about MH17, right? The Malaysian airliner that Igor Girkin shot down over Ukraine, on which over 200 Dutch citizens lost their lives. And so he talked about the history of Russian terrorism in the world. And then he said very clearly, Ukraine's place is in NATO. Ukraine's place is in NATO. And so what I think, now we don't know exactly what's going to happen at Ramstein on the 15th, but my guess is that we're finally going to have some official announcement regarding the use of Western long-range weapons into Russia. We also may see some path of ascension for Ukraine into the EU and/or into NATO. That is my fondest hope. Now, those are maximalist goals, clearly. But I think that from what we've heard about the victory plan includes all of that. And so one could expect that we would see some, and hopefully the Ramstein group will speak with one voice when this thing is over. But that remains to be seen. Now, this is all happening in the backdrop as Ukraine continues to use HIMARS-launched ATACMS, short-range ATACMS, cluster munitions against targets in Kursk. We've seen the ATACMS strikes against the pontoon bridges, which, by the way, the Russians keep trying to put up. They're desperate to get their men out of Kursk or get them resupplied in Kursk. Maybe a little bit of both. It's hard to tell. They keep putting up these pontoon bridges. The Ukrainians keep knocking them down. And they're clearly using ATACMS cluster munitions to do that and take out the engineering groups that are putting up those pontoon bridges. They took out an S-400 system the other day. Right, $400 million, clearly with cluster ATACMS. They hit an HQ with what appear to be ATACMS unitary warheads. It was a hardened structure. So we're living in this world where there is no official, yes, you can use American weapons in Russia, and yet the Ukrainians are using them, weapons that are supposed to be banned. So it was suggested by a Ukrainian official here that the first that the Russians will hear, the Russians will be the first to hear that the gloves have been taken off because they will feel those weapons hit on the territory of Russia. And that could well be what is happening. This guy, Matthew Miller, has insisted over the weekend that Ukraine has plenty of its own weapons and it doesn't need to use American weapons in Russia, and that there has been no policy change. So though we've heard stronger language from the president and vice president, the official line that the U.S. is towing is that there has been no policy change, which is very confusing when we see the reality on the battlefield, in my opinion. Here, I can play this video for you. If you're on YouTube, you'll see the video playing. If you're on TikTok, not. Where this is and what this is one of 6 glide bombs striking in Zaporizhia. And so what we're seeing is this ongoing grinding assault against civilians and civilian infrastructure using Russian-made glide bombs. Today, this attack unalived 1 and injured 9. 6 glide bombs struck high-rises, private homes, and energy infrastructure in Zaporizhia. In Kherson, this morning at 9 a.m., when the country was observing a moment of silence to remember the Day of the Defenders, Russian shelling struck an open-air market, unaliving 7 and injuring 6. That video I cannot play because there are bodies everywhere. This is the only still that I could take from that video where we didn't see the tragic victims of this attack. So while this country is in mourning, in a moment of silence, this is what the Russians do. I failed to mention in the attack on Zaporizhia, they also took out the substation, the power substation, that ensures that the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant stays cool. And so they risk a critical radiological event by targeting that power substation. And it is worth pointing out that right now there is a reverse jet stream from the Caspian Sea. So the wind is blowing west right now and will be for the next couple days. To hit that plant and risk a radiological event on one of the few days of the year that the wind is blowing west instead of east does not seem like a coincidence to me. It does not seem like a coincidence to me. And we know, of course, the Ukrainians have warned that we could expect attacks against these kinds of supporting infrastructure of the Ukrainian nuclear power grid. Back to Kherson. Not only was the market hit today, but there is a new report out by the online media group Tochny.info. They're an online media organization, and they are making the claim that the Russians are basically conducting human safaris. They're hunting humans for their own perverse pleasure in Kherson. That drones are targeting civilians. We've seen they cite attacks on cemeteries and funeral parlors. The funeral parlor next to the Antonivka Cemetery, where the war dead tend to be buried, was hit 3 times in the first week of September. Now that is not... Why are you targeting a funeral home? Because there's innocent civilians there that you don't care about and that you feel you have a license to hunt. That's what's happening all up and down the front line, but it's particularly bad in Kherson. According to data, 266 civilians have been unalived by first-person view drones in Kherson between June 21st and September 26th. 266 grandmothers, parents, children at open-air markets, in their cars, on the street, at the post office, at the cemetery, at the funeral home, trying to go about their business in the midst of this nightmare. And of course, the daily shelling on Kherson doesn't stop. Today we saw 7 people unalived, 6 injured in the shelling of the market, but just yesterday 17 were wounded in Kherson. And so the attacks on civilians in Kherson, and all up and down the front line, continue unabated as Russia continues its terror campaign against the people of Ukraine. Let's go to a frontline update. There's not a lot of movement on the map, but let's look at just a couple of things. But one of the things that we're seeing now is we're seeing these large-scaled mechanized attacks, the likes of which we have not seen since 2023 inside of Ukraine. The Russians have been doing small company-sized infantry attacks, avoiding scaled armor attacks, because the Ukrainians just kept knocking them out with drones. So now they're back to that methodology, but guess what? The Ukrainians are just destroying the columns. And so, for example, even though there's not much of a change to the map, the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back. This is about 15 miles southeast of Sudza. And there was a large column assault down here by the Russians. And they did manage to advance a couple hundred meters. but it cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 armored vehicles, a combination of tanks and APCs. Meanwhile, to the southwest, over in this region south of the same river, Ukraine has expanded its territorial hold. It is worth pointing out that today is October 1st. Remember, Putin originally gave the Russian army until October 1st to eject all Ukrainians from the territory of the Russian Federation. Not only are they not ejected, the amount of land that they control inside of Russia keeps increasing. While the Russians may have pushed them out of a few hundred meters of southern Kursk, over on the western side there, the Ukrainians have advanced several kilometers. That's a big difference. It's a big difference. Now, in Volchansk, we saw another armored assault in an attempt to take back the aggregate plant, right? Remember, the aggregate plant was that section that was cut off from the main body of the Russians and was recently taken back by the Ukrainians. They found inside the bodies of more than one Russian who had starved to death. So rather than surrender, the Russians trapped in the aggregate plant literally starved to death. Russia's nowhere near done, guys. I saw a video today, somebody claiming that Russians are calling for Putin's resignation. This is nonsense. As far as I can tell, support for Putin since the Kursk invasion has actually increased inside of Russia, because now the Russians feel like, oh, the Ukrainians are here, NATO is here, we're being invaded, we need to line up behind our strongman leader. So the Russians are nowhere near ready to overthrow this murderous dictator that they have in charge. Nowhere near. Let's see. Of the 20 vehicles that attacked, 17 MTLBs and 3 tanks were lost. So that's 100% destruction of the armor that attempted to retake the aggregate plant today. We saw something similar, only on a scale 3 times that size. So this is in the Luhansk Oblast, right on the Kyiv border. And the Russians are trying to push toward the Oskil River. They had made an advance of several kilometers back in October, back in August. But they have been stalled there for about 3 weeks now in an attempt to make a breakthrough in the direction of Kupiansk. 2 large armored columns yesterday, this is just yesterday, of 40 combined tanks and APCs, and another column of 20 combined tanks and APCs, along with a ton of other vehicles. Now, when I say other vehicles, that means everything from Desert Cross buggies, right, the golf carts that they're using, to motorcycles, to electric scooters. Not even a joke. We're seeing Russians charging the front line on electric scooters, e-scooters. No protection, nothing to stop the drones, nothing to stop the bullets. Just rushing headlong toward their end. 100% of both columns were damaged or destroyed, as well as the estimated 100 or so troops, 120 troops that were with them. And there's no progress made by the Russians on this front. Everything here is deadlocked. Down in Toretsk, in the high-rise section, the Ukrainians actually managed to push the Russians out of some of their positions and recapture some of the high-rises right at the tip of that salient that expands into Toretsk. Further back, the salient itself expanded north and south marginally. Small gains for the Russians in Toretsk. Down in New York, Russia is still trying to retake New York, and there is reported to be heavy fighting down there, as well as heavy fighting in Toretsk. In the Pokrovsk direction, again, the salient is stalled about 6.5 kilometers, about 4 miles from Pokrovsk. But the overall salient continues to expand north and south. And there are an estimated 70,000 Russian troops in this press and push. And it doesn't look like they're going anywhere. Volodar has officially, or for all practical purposes, if not officially, fallen to the Russians after some 21 months of heavy pushing. 31 months. My apologies, 31 months of heavy pushing. It is estimated that the Russians have lost 800 armored vehicles in Volodar. That's tanks, armored trucks, APCs, etc., infantry fighting vehicles, MTLBs. 800 vehicles. For a town of a few thousand people before the war, and that is now nothing but ash and ruin because of the constant fighting here. I cannot help but see every one of these victories as Pyrrhic. Pointless to be king of the ashes in a world where you have destroyed everything. It makes no sense to me at all. For its part, the Russians have expanded the budget to 30% on defense. So 3 out of every 10 federal budget dollars will be spent on defense in 2025. But that does not include domestic security spending or classified spending. When we add that in to the total budgetary defense spend, it brings it to 40% of the federal budget. That's 4 out of every $10, or to a total of 41.5 trillion rubles. These levels have not been seen since the end of the Soviet era, and I would remind everybody that that was one of the things that contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is according to Bloomberg and the Moscow Times. For reference, I would point out that U.S. federal defense spending is 13.3% of our budget, and we have a much bigger budget. So even though it's only 13% of the budget, we spend far more on defense than the Russians are, at 40% of their budget. For his part, Putin is doubling down, insisting that all goals of the SMO will be completed. He said this Monday, September 30th in Moscow as he celebrated the 2-year anniversary of the illegal annexation of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. So he's celebrating Restoration or Reunification Day, however you want to translate that, over his illegal annexation of the territories of another sovereign nation. He swore that he would protect Russian speakers from the neo-Nazi dictatorship that aimed to cut them off from Russia, their historic homeland. Even as the Russian army relentlessly destroys Ukrainian villages and towns in the east, sacrificing huge numbers of men and equipment to make small marginal gains over the ruins they have created. This was Putin's take yesterday in Moscow. All right. So guys, that takes me to the end of my top line news for the day. And we'll go to Q&A. Let me just thank again the sponsors of tonight's live and lives for this whole week. The board of directors, Ballerina, Bobby, Dark Irish, Jason Willis Star, and Lars from Encino Tech. I want to thank the mods, Cheyenne, Vanetta, PT, Jay, and Travis, as well as Lars, who has the Discord server and the Alexievich archive, Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps public group on the Book of Faces, and Effin Hell, who, because we had these sponsors for this whole week, asked me if he could PayPal me some money and get a sponsorship of a video. And I said, sure, pal, please, by all means. The rent is due this week. So if anybody is interested in sponsoring a live next week or having a video sponsorship, please refer to the PayPal in the bio, or better yet, join the Patreon. Please, join the Patreon and help ensure long-term support for this channel so that we know that I can be here for you because you are here for me. And with that, we'll go to Q&A. Okay, so questions, comments, points of observation, or personal need. Hey, Bobby. There is a delay on YouTube. Is it 18 seconds, Fitz? Could be. Bobby has a great question. What's the latest info on ammo dump number 4? Now, it's actually ammo dump number 7. Or, I'm sorry, 6, right? Because we had the 2 ammo dumps in Tavir, the one in Voronezh, the one in Krasnodar, and the one in Mariupol. So 5 major ammo dumps in the last 2 weeks. Plus, now this 6th one. It's not clear, Bobby, right now. So and that's why I didn't mention it. So there was last night a drone attack on a 6th ammo dump. The ammo dump where purportedly the Iranian fought 360 missiles were being moved into. And so this was an attempt to take those Iranian missiles off the table. It is unclear that they got the missiles or not. We don't know. NASA firms data shows a fire at the site, as well as an airbase nearby that was also hit. But the firm's data is not enough to tell us that they hit the missiles. We're going to have to wait until we get some satellite pictures to know for sure, I think, Bobby. Nobody is reporting that it was a good hit and that they got the missiles. Nobody is saying that. But we don't know. Dawn Patrols wants to know, did the F-16s vanish? What happened to the F-16s? I don't think anything's happened to the F-16s. I think the F-16s are still being used on a daily basis to shoot down incoming air targets. I think. I don't honestly know. I also think that after what could likely turn out to be either pilot error or friendly fire, which is how they lost that first F-16, if it turns out that that first F-16 was lost through pilot error or friendly fire, then the whole institution is going to be in a reflexive process right now, trying to iron that shit out to make sure that it does not happen again. The integration of a modern multi-role fighter into an evolving military, let's say, has got to be a huge challenge. And I think the Ukrainians are wrestling with that challenge as best they can. Hey, hobo. I count on my fingers like a German. Well, that's better than a toddler, I guess. PT confirms my suspicion that the F-16s are most likely being used in that air defense role. That seems to be the first mission for the F-16s. And once the guys get good at that, they'll look at another role that fighter jet can play, and they'll add that layer of complexity. Is I think what's going on. And it looks like somebody is TKS Daddy is confirming that without air dominance, that would be the wisest, letting equipment do ranged fighting. And that does seem to be what's going on. Does Ukraine have permission to use ATACMS in Russia, or is that on hold? Bobby, to the best of my knowledge, they do not have permission. And spokesperson for this Department of State, Matthew Miller, over the weekend reiterated that they did not have that permission. But it is worth mentioning, hey, Renee Herman, it is worth mentioning that increasingly officials are saying that when permission is given for long-range strikes inside Russia, the first people to know about it will be the Russians. So I'm hopeful that that means permission's already been given. Oh yeah, Jackie, you're lucky you got out when you did. It's been loud here. F-16s to be fit out with advanced weaponry, including glide bombs. We're sending glide bombs. We are sending glide bombs or kits or a combination thereof. And so that's happening. That's a real thing. How's your restaurant guide coming? I confess I have not actually been working on one, but you are right, Flip. I should do that, dude. I don't think that Volodar is a serious setback. Paul, there's no, the State Department is still saying publicly that there's been no policy change and that Ukraine has enough of its own domestically produced weapons to hit Russia where it counts. That's the official line. Is Volodar a serious setback? I don't think that Volodar is a serious setback, Bobby. Look, Volodar was a frontline town. The reality is that the Russians have been trying to take it for 31 months. They have lost 800 vehicles taking it. They have leveled the ground, the town to the ground, taking it. It is not a major logistics hub. It is not strategically important in any way. It hurts. Every time a Ukrainian town is taken, it hurts. There's still 100 civilians in that town. But really, it's just a small town in the middle of nowhere. It has no real significance. Rapid Dragon is being adapted to modern intel soon for mass drone launches. Hey, PH, how you doing? Cluster munitions on the same river in Russia only get delivered by one thing, right? Yeah, HIMARS. Now, the missile that does HIMARS fire are ATACMS. So, Paul, we're in a gray zone here. You're thinking of the Kerch Bridge, not the Kursk Bridge. There's no bridges in Kursk left anymore. Hi, Peter. Do you work for the government? No, I don't fucking work for the government. That's why I don't have this goddamn bridge done, because I can't afford it. I would give anything for the CIA dental program. If anybody is listening, and they always are, aren't they, Pancake? Please, I could use a dental program. No, I don't know Joey Contino. I'm sure that the Continos are very busy with friends and family and work. They did not come here to see me. So we have no plans to meet. Joey Contino has not reached out to me, and I do not know him. It would be great to meet the guy, sure, but I'm sure they're very busy. It's important to remember that his, as I understand it, his wife's family is Ukrainian. And so it's not just a question of friends and family here, or not just a question of friends and colleagues. It's also a question of family. So I don't expect to hear from Joey Contino. I don't know Joey Contino. I have a lot of respect for his work. And it would be great to meet him, but I'm sure they're very busy. Well, Julian Patel, you're not wrong, right? Julian says, I'm sure they're being vague purposefully on what system Washington publicly supports using. The only thing is, Washington was very clear that ATACMS were not to be used even in the cross-border raids. They were very clear on that. When they gave the permission for HIMARS launches across border, they very specifically said, but not ATACMS. It's a very confusing policy. Okay, what else? Hey, Darth Else is here. Hey, man, how you doing? Dude, what did you do? I saw a video of yours today, and I was just like, oh, that's good. I forget. I don't know. If you guys don't follow Darth Else, you should. Not officially, Paul. Not officially. I don't know what that means, Sasha with the VPN. Yeah, Dark Bamboozler. I think that that's what's going on. I read that they will not announce officially. Increasingly, we're hearing officials say that the first people to know that long-range weapons are in play will be the Russians. I'm looking forward to the Ramstein group meeting October 15th. I think that we'll see some announcements come out of there. Russia's map on Kursk versus the ISWs is laughable. It really is. It is laughable. Kursk, there's still a lot of heavy fighting. The Russians keep trying to put pontoon bridges over the same river. The Ukrainians keep blowing them up. The Russians, a large assault group of about 20 armored vehicles, made some advance a couple hundred meters southeast of Sudza, but the Ukrainians advanced a couple of kilometers in the west. Darth Elsa and I and Joey Contino and everybody, hey Tony Takiri, how you doing? And everybody that does pro-democracy, pro-Ukraine are being suppressed to some degree or another. I mean, it's very frustrating. And I don't know what to do about it. I guess we just have to wait for the Russians to run out of money and stop financing the suppression. And when those algorithms get turned off, when the bills don't get paid, hopefully we'll be back to normal. How many fatalities has the Russian army suffered now? So in the Wall Street Journal last week or 2 weeks ago now, there was a good analysis of all of the open source data that was available. And it was estimated that the Russians have lost, unalived, 200,000 men, 400,000 men wounded. It was estimated that the Ukrainians have lost 80,000 men with 400,000 wounded. Now here's what's important there. If it's right, if that data is right, and there seems to be a consensus among intelligence agencies that that's somewhere close to some semblance of the truth. If that's right, then that means that for every Russian unalived, or I'm sorry, for every 2 Russians wounded, stop. It's 200,000 to 400,000 killed to wounded Russians. So for every 3 Russians hit, 2 are wounded, 1 dies. For the Ukrainians, it's 80,000 to 400,000. That means for every 6 Ukrainians hit, 5 are wounded, 1 dies. That's a huge difference. If those numbers are right, then the Russians are losing twice or more than that the number of men on a ratio performance basis than the Ukrainians are. The Ukrainians are getting wounded, the Russians are getting unalived. Over time, that's going to hollow out your army, and we're seeing it now already. Russia's already in the midst of a labor crisis. They're short about 4.3 million workers, and Russia's just announced a new conscription of 133,000. They're going to take 133,000 19 to 29-year-olds out of the workforce. And who knows how many more that's going to drive out of the country. The Russians are in an unsustainable spiral where they cannot replace the losses that they are suffering. They can't replace the tanks at the rate that they're losing them. They can't replace the infantry fighting vehicles at the rate they're losing them. And now they can no longer replace the men at the rate that they are losing them. No, they can't do it. It's not sustainable. Massively lost competence and the ability to train. Absolutely. And they're losing the institutional knowledge. The entire army that came into Ukraine has now been unalived, wounded and sent home, or retired out. Right, exactly. We lost 57,000 men in Vietnam over almost 20 years. Over almost 20 years. And you're telling me that the Russians in 2.5 years have lost 4 times what the U.S. lost in Vietnam? And the people are nowhere near ready to rebel. Nowhere near ready. All right, guys, it's 9 minutes to the top of the hour. Final questions, comments. NATO training is important, no doubt about it. No about a doubt it. All right, well, if nobody's got anything else, I'm going to make one more. The Russian mothers can't say anything. There was a group of mothers that tried to get together. They were outlawed. They were called extremists. They were called treasonous. They weren't arrested, but people that were men that were protesting with them were arrested and summarily sent to the front. There's really no update on the F-16's Magical other than that the investigation into the loss of the first F-16 continues, and the F-16s continue to fly combat missions against air defense targets. Don't hear about that dog. I don't know what that means. Will that affect arms deliveries to Russia? Oh, yeah, so don't hear about that, do we? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't hear about what? Oh no, much less than 50% of the F-16s have been, much less. The Ukrainians have been promised something like 132 F-16s, and we don't know how many they have, but it's estimated to be less than a dozen. Thanks, Bernard. It's getting increasingly difficult to tell it. Nobody sees my videos anymore. They're completely suppressed. How many months setback on those ammo dump explosions? We don't know exactly. We know that there was 75 days worth of ammo of shells, 152 millimeter shells in one location in Toretsk. I'm sorry, Toropets. We all up, Bobby? We don't know. Although increasingly Russian mill bloggers are starting to complain about shell hunger on the front. So we'll see if that, we'll see how that plays out. But the mill bloggers are now increasingly talking about a lack of ammunition. Hey, Maddie, right? No news coverage about Russian moms being put down by the Russian government. No, there was some news coverage. Euromaidan Press covered it. Juzzy over on Ukraine War News TV covered it. ATP Geopolitics covered it. There was some coverage. I mean, the problem is the free press in Russia shut down. So just reporting out of Russia is not an easy thing to do. Thanks, man. Nice Elvis gift. Yes, that I did like the Elvis. Denang me, why don't you get a rope and hang me? Viva Denang. Viva Denang. Yeehaw. Hey, cool. Oh, tell the wife I said hello, Flippy. You guys are great. I think Russia's about to have problems because of the Iranian attack on Israel. Do you think America has bot farms like Russia? No, if we did, I wouldn't have to be here. This is the problem. This is the problem. We know what the Russians are doing, and we are not countering it. Idiots like me take it upon ourselves to shout into the void. It's not a comprehensive solution to the challenge that we are facing of this disinformation problem. Darth Elsa, Dr. K, Dave Hayes. These are all people with real lives, full-time jobs. And they're in here trying to get the truth out, to counter the disinformation that is out there, that is funded by the Kremlin. What happened to the group of guys who were Mr. Blah, blah, blah? I think that what you're talking about is you're talking about the Russian Freedom Legion. And right now, I think what they're doing is trying to recruit Russians into their army because they're an anti-Putin Russian army. In the power vacuum that comes after Putin's demise, we could well see real civil war inside Russia. Sure did, Bobby. Thank you. Are you really quitting TikTok? No, I'm not quitting TikTok. TikTok is quitting me. They won't show my videos. They keep banning my lives. So I'm going to be live on TikTok and YouTube from now on. And when I grow the YouTube audience, I intend to get the fuck out of here. Why would I stick around where I am not appreciated? And I am not appreciated here. Thanks, Hardly. So if anybody wants to help out, like the board of directors does, and the Patreon guys do, take a look at the bio. Oh, I got to fix it on YouTube. It's wrong on YouTube, but it's right on TikTok. It's the first of the month, so rent is due. Anybody that can help with that, that would be great. I appreciate it. Thanks, big thanks to the moderator team, to the sponsors of tonight's live, the board of directors, Lars, Nightshade, and especially to Vanetta, who has our Google Doc share, where you can get templates, email message templates to Congress, the Senate, and the White House, urging their support for Ukraine. So take a look at those. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being there for me. Because you are there for me, I can be here for you. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.